All right, welcome to another deep dive, everybody, where we take one listener's chosen source material and really kind of go deep,
Yeah,
to uncover those little gems, those really key insights
absolutely.
that hopefully give everybody a little bit of a shortcut to being really well informed without having to, you know, read all the things and watch all the things.
Right, you get to skip to the good stuff.
You can skip to the good stuff.
Exactly.
So today's a little different. One of our listeners has given us a little section, a little set of excerpts from a work of fiction,
Okay.
from the novel The World,
Yeah.
according to Garp, by John Irving.
No, that is a classic.
It's a big one, right?
Big one.
Yeah.
It's a long one too.
It's a long one, yeah.
So yeah, we're not going to read the whole thing.
You're not going to read the whole thing, but that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah.
We've got these little snippets, these excerpts, and we're going to see what we can pull out of them.
Absolutely. And the thing about fiction is that even though we think of it as, made up stories and all that, right.
There's often so much truth in there about,
Yeah.
the human condition and about the way society works and
Yeah.
all that. And so I think exploring fiction can actually sometimes give us a better insight
Sure.
than, just straight nonfiction.
Yeah, and you get to see it play out, right?
Right.
In a way that with nonfiction you're kind of often told how things are or how things should be. With fiction you can kind of see what happens when
Right.
you apply those things, or you see those rules of society, or those kind of unspoken rules of human nature playing out.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, those unspoken rules.
Yeah.
And also to see how these characters are
Yeah.
shaped by, their environment, by the events that happen in their lives. So
Yeah.
it's really cool to delve into fiction this way.
Yeah. So at the center of these excerpts we have Jenny Fields and her son T.S. Garp.
Now,
Just to set this up a little bit, Jenny Fields, very strong personality, right?
oh, yeah.
Very and not really into romance, very sort of dances to the beat of her own drum,
Very independent.
very independent.
Yeah, and strong-willed.
Yes, and Garp, her son, his life is very much influenced by his mother,
Absolutely.
and her worldview. So in these excerpts that we've got, it really covers a huge swath of their lives. We start with Jenny and her reaction to sort of unwanted advances, and then her very deliberate decision to be a single mother. Then we move on to Garp's kind of formative experiences at this school called the Steering School.
Yeah, the steering school?
Aptly named the Steering School. We also have some time in Vienna,
Yes.
where they both spend some time together, and then later life at Dog's Head Harbor.
Dog's Head Harbor. Okay.
So we've got a lot to cover here.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. So I think our mission
Okay.
in this deep dive is to really try to understand what are the core beliefs and values that Jenny Fields is kind of operating under.
Yes.
How is she portrayed? What do we learn about her? And how do those beliefs actually shape her son's life?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great mission. So let's kick it off, shall we?
Let's kick it off.
So right off the bat, I think we see Jenny as somebody who is super self-reliant
Absolutely.
and not really interested in following the rules of society,
Right.
or at least not the rules that are kind of expected of her.
Yeah.
What immediately comes to mind is that incident in the movie theater
Oh, yeah.
where she's somebody's making unwanted advances on
Yeah.
her, and her reaction is not your typical polite, oh no thank you, or whatever.
Right. Yeah, not a gentle rebuff.
No, not a gentle rebuff. It's she's got a scalpel
A scalpel.
and she uses it.
Interesting choice for a movie date, a scalpel.
But she's a nurse.
Well, yeah.
She carries it
What
with
do
her, and
Yeah.
and it's very clear that
Yeah.
she's not afraid to use it to protect herself.
Right.
And it's not even presented
Right.
as a big dramatic thing. It's kind of
It's matter of fact.
it's matter of fact.
That's what she does.
That's what she does. And she tells the police officer later, oh yeah, I know how people bleed. I'm a nurse.
Right.
I couldn't have done worse.
Yeah, she's almost boastful about it.
Yeah. It's a little scary,
Yeah,
actually.
it's a little scary. Yeah.
But it really establishes her, I think,
Mm.
as a woman who is going to do things her own way,
Yeah, absolutely.
according to her own internal logic.
And I think that scene really forces us as readers
Yeah.
to question why so often we see unwanted advances and these sorts of things framed through a romantic lens.
Oh, interesting.
It's oh, well, maybe he just
Right.
likes her or something, but this is clearly not that. This is
Right.
a violation, and she reacts accordingly.
Yeah, it's a real statement about female agency
Absolutely.
and rejection of that expected vulnerability
Not
that we're
fair.
talking about. And this self-reliance, it's not just limited to kind of physical self-defense.
Right.
It also extends to like the way she wants to have a family.
Yeah.
She, very clearly wants to have a child,
Yeah.
but on her own terms.
On her own terms, right?
She's not interested in like the whole romance thing.
Doesn't want to be tied down.
Or even like a traditional marriage or a relationship.
Mm-mm.
And it's, and this of course leads to her being labeled a sexual suspect.
Right.
Which is, the title of her famous book. But it's so interesting because it's like,
yeah,
what she's doing is just like wanting to have a family,
yeah,
but doing it her own way.
Yeah, and I think that really challenges us to think about the traditional link between procreation and romance and marriage.
Why do those things have to go together?
Right, yeah, and to consider the validity of alternative family structures.
Yeah.
Why is that seen as so suspicious?
Yeah.
So radical in a way.
Yeah, and even the way she goes about, the practical matter of having a child, it's so transactional.
Yeah.
She's not interested in, repeated attempts at conception or, all the things that you might associate with, trying to start a family.
Yeah.
Very, like, she even says something like, I want a baby, not a sperm farm.
Right, exactly.
I'm paraphrasing. But
yeah, that's the essence of it.
it's so, like, to the point, and I think maybe even a little bit funny in its directness.
Yeah, it's almost darkly humorous.
Yeah.
But it's like she cuts through all of the kind of the fluff and the ceremony.
Yes.
And just goes straight to the point.
Yes. What does she want? She wants a baby.
Yeah.
This is how she's going to get it.
Exactly.
Even her departure from her family and the landlady
Yeah.
kind of is influenced by this rejection of societal expectations.
Right.
Despite her very private life, her family's assumption of lewdness is really striking. It really kind of underscores those judgments that people make about women who step outside those traditional roles.
Absolutely. And they show that by, giving her these really inappropriate gifts.
Douchebags
And nursing shoes.
Nursing shoes, yeah.
Yeah, it's like they can't even imagine what she might be doing. They jump to these conclusions.
Yeah, and it's presented in this almost absurd way.
Yeah.
Which I think Irving does so well.
Yeah.
And so what is Jenny's definition of vulgarity? It's basically wanting a job.
Yeah.
Wanting to live alone and wanting to have a baby.
Yeah.
Without sharing her life with someone.
Exactly.
It's really just about her wanting to live authentically according to her own principles.
Yeah. So it really sets the stage, I think, for understanding her core values, right?
Yeah.
This fierce independence, this self-reliance, and this sort of rejection of what she sees as, unnecessary social customs and expectations.
And then you have that story about the mourning woman at Wellesley.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
Where she's kind of like observing this woman who's obviously grieving, and she has this internal thought. That poor woman needed to be told what to feel.
Yeah.
And then Garp later remembers his mother saying that this woman was like the stupidest woman she ever met.
Even though she was a Wellesley graduate.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's just so like uncompromising.
It's very blunt.
It is, yeah.
It's very direct, and it kind of makes you wonder, is that a form of emotional detachment that she has, right?
Because we often think of like, okay, well, you need to offer gentle support to people who are grieving. Yeah. But she's kind of like, no, you need to just like get over it.
You need some guidance.
Yeah.
Here's what you should feel.
Yeah, and I think that.
Yeah.
Dude has have a lasting impact on Garp and how he views the world.
Absolutely. It shapes his own emotional landscape.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's move on to Garp's early life and the influence of the steering school, right?
The steering school, yeah.
Yeah.
So even Garp's like very beginnings are really unconventional, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's conceived with this ball turret gunner, Serge Garp, who's he's just come back from his 35th mission over France.
Wow.
And he's like in this near catatonic state, almost like a regression. And it's very strange. It's very bizarre.
Unsettling, right? It's unsettling. And it's not really explained, but it's just kind of like...
It just is.
It just is. And Jenny nurses him through this, and she has these really intense maternal and even sexual feelings towards him. And she even believes that she can conceive again through suckling.
Wow.
It's like very primal, very strange.
Yeah.
And so this is the environment that Garp is born into.
That's the world he enters into.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have Jenny's decision to work and live at the steering school in the infirmary annex. And her main reason for being there is so Garp can get a superior education. Again, it's like her own very particular way of thinking.
Yeah, she's making those choices for him.
Yes, she is. And so she becomes this kind of de facto mother figure to all the boys at the school.
Right.
And, it's this kind of chaotic environment with boys getting in all sorts of trouble.
Typical schoolboy antics.
Typical schoolboy antics.
Yeah.
And you get these little glimpses into Garp's childhood. The missing lacrosse stick.
Yeah, possibly involving this kid named Hathaway. The underground tunnel.
Underground tunnel.
This obsession with the pigeons on the roof.
Yeah.
And even when he gets punished by Dean Bodger, there's this very clear message. Don't ever disappoint your mother, boy.
Yeah.
It's like her presence is everywhere.
Her influence is pervasive.
Yes.
Even in those early years.
Yeah. And then you have this kind of interesting interaction with the Percy family.
Oh, the Percys, yeah.
Fat Stu and Midge.
Cat Stew.
They're very much presented as this wealthy, maybe a little bit superficial.
Yeah, a little oblivious.
Family. And it's really interesting to see Garp kind of navigating these different social spheres.
Right.
Because he's the son of the nurse.
Yeah.
But he's also playing with these, rich kids.
Yeah. And Jenny, of course, observes all of this.
Yeah.
And has her own opinions about the Percys and their wealth and their kind of way of life.
Yeah. And there's all these other students, too, like Clarence Dugard, Talbot Mayer Jones, Emily Hamilton, the Grove Brothers.
It's like a whole cast of characters.
It really is.
Yeah.
And they just kind of flit in and out of the story.
They add texture.
But, it's kind of this interesting view into the steering school, and it's kind of eccentricities.
Yeah.
And then you have that incident with Bonkers the dog.
Bonkers the dog. Oh, yeah.
And Cushy Percy.
Yeah.
And, Garp, he bites the dog's ear.
Bites the dog's ear.
He does.
Why does he do that?
Well, it's very impulsive.
Okay.
And then he misunderstands Cushy's reaction. She says, oh, gross. And he initially thinks it's because her father's naked.
Right.
But it's actually because he's bitten the dog's ear.
Right.
And then later on, he asks his mother about good taste.
About good taste.
And it's such a great kind of window into his developing social awareness.
Yeah, his journey.
Grasping these social views.
And his reliance on his mother to help him kind of figure it all out.
Absolutely.
And then even like the steering school itself, right?
It's described as this like failing port. And, there's this joke about the Muddy River being named after Everett Steering.
Right.
And it's more than just a school, right? It's this place with a history.
It has a certain atmosphere.
It does.
A certain character. And it's almost a character in itself.
Yeah.
In the book.
Yeah. And then finally, Jenny's reaction to the wrestling room.
Oh, the wrestling room.
She observes the coach and the wrestlers. And she makes this really interesting analogy where she compares the intensity of wrestling to something as deliberate and as desperate as rape.
Wow.
And it's really striking, and you're kind of like, whoa, where did that come from?
It's powerful and unsettling.
Yes.
It definitely stays with you.
Yeah, but it also kind of hints at maybe some of her underlying anxieties or cynicism or something.
It makes you wonder.
It does.
What's going on under the surface there.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's move on to Garp's adolescence.
Okay.
And kind of his own identity starting to emerge.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that we see is his encounter with Helen Holm.
Helen Holm, okay.
At the wrestling room in the stadium.
Yeah.
And she's very serious, very focused.
Yeah.
And she says something very specific, which is that she will only marry a writer.
Okay.
Or a wrestler who's also a writer.
Or a wrestler who's also a writer.
And it's very clear that this makes an impression on Garp.
Yeah, it's like a challenge almost to him.
It is, and he's already a wrestler.
Right.
So now he needs to become a writer.
Right, exactly.
And it's a very interesting, kind of like foreshadowing moment, I think.
Yeah.
And then you have Mr. Tinch. And his influence on Garp's writing. Now, this is kind of a funny little anecdote.
Yeah.
The breath fresheners. And, Mr. Tinch asking Garp about his breath.
Yeah.
But it really underscores this idea of honesty.
Honesty.
Even if it's a little humorless.
Yeah, humorless honesty.
Which becomes very characteristic of Garp's writing.
It becomes his style.
Yeah, and he really believes that nothing comes naturally.
Yeah.
So when people call him like a brown writer or whatever, he's kind of like, no, it's all about effort.
It's about the work.
It's about hard work.
Right.
It's about discipline. And I think, Jenny's influence is really apparent there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then his interactions with Cushy at the cannons, which are now sadly littered with trash.
Yeah.
You really start to see his own kind of feelings and opinions about people and about relationships.
Yeah.
Kind of forming.
He's becoming more aware of
Yes.
those complexities
Yes.
of those relationships.
And then Jenny decides to take Garp to Europe.
To Europe.
So that he can focus on writing.
Focus on writing.
While she also is writing her book.
Right.
And this is a big turning point for them.
Yeah.
Garp feels a little bit doomed.
Doomed.
Because he's like, I'm always with my mother. You know, he even writes to Helen about it.
Yeah.
But you also see that Jenny is forming this friendship with Ernie Holm.
Ernie Holm.
Which is interesting because Ernie is Helen's father.
Right.
So there's this connection there.
Yeah.
Then Garp graduates from steering. And it's kind of a bittersweet moment. Helen and Cushy aren't there.
They're not there.
And he has these like sleeting thoughts about fat stew.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, he's moving on.
He's moving on to the next stage.
To the next stage of his life.
Yeah.
And then you have this kind of strange and somewhat awkward sexual encounter between Garp and Cushy.
At the infirmary end.
At the infirmary end.
Yeah.
Yeah, which of course is interrupted by
Bonkers
again, the dog. Then later on, of course, it's discovered.
Yeah.
Stuart Percy.
Right.
And it's interesting because it leaves this like lasting impression on Garp.
Yeah.
And he starts to associate sex with like certain smells in deserted places after rain.
That's so specific.
Yeah, it's very specific. And it's also very much tied to his experience with Cushy.
And he always has this sense of terrific optimism.
Terrific optimism.
Yeah. Even though it's all kind of awkward and strange.
Right.
He still has this optimism about it,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
So now they go to Vienna.
Vienna. Okay.
And this is where we really start to see their dynamic shift a little bit.
Okay.
Garp's more aware of the city itself.
Yeah.
He's noticing Vienna. He's also helping to manage Jenny's writing life.
Okay. Yeah.
A little bit. And he makes these like funny little comments to Helen. Like, oh, my mother, the writer.
Yeah.
But you can also tell that he's a little envious.
A little envious of her success.
Yes, of her productivity. And he's struggling with his own writing a bit.
Right.
During this time. Jenny, on the other hand, she's very blunt about her opinions of a writer's room that they visit.
Yeah.
She doesn't like it.
She doesn't like it at all.
And she's also described as having this like very messy manuscript.
Yeah.
So it's not about the aesthetics. For her, it's about the substance.
A message.
And you get these like funny little snapshots of their time in Vienna. You know, they go to the opera house. Jenny really wants a fur muff.
Yeah.
They encounter some prostitutes.
Oh, okay.
Garp kind of misinterprets the situation.
Oh.
Jenny slaps him.
She slaps him, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little out of character.
A little out of character for her.
Yeah.
But it shows you how, those lines can get blurred sometimes.
Yes.
And how she has her own boundaries and her own ways of enforcing them.
Yes, and Garp also visits some prostitutes.
Okay.
Although not the expensive ones.
Not the expensive ones.
Yeah.
So he's being budget conscious.
Yes, or maybe just, has his own preferences.
Yeah.
And then they go traveling with Jenny's family, her parents and her grandmother.
Okay.
And they're very critical of the hotels and restaurants.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to see, Jenny and Garp kind of like tag teaming their criticism.
Right.
And this is also where we learn that the family sometimes rents a castle.
They rent a castle. They do.
Well, it's just like another example of their
slightly unusual background.
Unconventional lifestyle.
Yeah. And then to top it all off, there's a bear on a unicycle at one of the hotels.
Bear on a unicycle?
A bear on a unicycle.
That's a new one.
It's a very vivid image.
It is.
And it's just like one of those like very Irving moments.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, okay, I did not expect that.
That's John Irving for you.
That's John Irving.
Yeah.
So they come back from Vienna, and Garp says that he feels like he's walked Vienna out.
Walked Vienna out.
Like he's just experienced it all.
Like he's absorbed it.
He's absorbed it, yeah. Jenny continues to write, and we see this like quiet concern from Garp about Charlotte. Who's, obviously a significant character in the novel. And then you have that encounter with Herr Dr. Thalhammer.
Or Dr. Thalhammer.
Who had previously treated Garp for clap.
Okay.
And then he meets Thalhammer's daughter, who reminds him of Helen.
Oh, wow.
So there's these kind of like lingering effects